Hello, I'm Alexa. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be interviewing a good friend of mine who lives all the way in Sydney, Australia, and his name is Chris. I met Chris last year in October when I was traveling for InVision's Design Exchange Conference. I thought now would be a great opportunity to interview Chris about what his experience was like interviewing for InVision, which is a fully remote company, as well as what advice he has now after having gone through interviewing fully remote himself and also working at a company that is all remote. So I'm about to switch over to my computer here. Let's go. Hi.
Yo, what's going on? How you doing?
Doing well. How are you?
As good as humanly possible.
Yes. What's behind you?
Oh, it's my New York canvas.
Is it? Nice.
I like to, as you could probably tell from knowing me, I don't like to let it go.
It was at this time in 2019 that Chris was just beginning his journey as a full-time remote customer success manager for the digital product design platform InVision. Based in Sydney, Australia, he has the opportunity to work closely with the Asia Pacific's biggest brands to enable the best possible digital product experiences through the intersection of people, processes, and platforms. On the surface, it looks pretty appealing as he was fortunate to work and travel in 6 different countries throughout the year. But behind closed doors, there's a lot of late-night Zoom calls, 24/7 Slack notifications, and solitary typing away on a screen. Yet he wouldn't change a thing. Having previously experienced rigid corporate working expectations, remote working has been the most productive career year yet. Amazing. Thank you, Chris. Welcome.
Always, thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so you told me your whole interview process with InVision was remote, which is super cool, right? So if you can just bring us back to when you were interviewing for an InVision, what did that feel like? Like, how did you prepare for something like that?
It was bizarre. There's no other way to put it. At first, it was really, really bizarre. So at the time, I was interviewing with a lot of different places here in Sydney. And my good friend of mine who had been in InVision for a while said that I should consider coming to InVision. Looking at the remote work model was very, very different for me because I'd always been in that office environment. I'd always had the social aspect of it. I'd always had the ability to just go tap someone on the shoulder. And the thought of sitting in my room or building an office in my house and living as at my sole space was really confronting. So, of course, given the incredible things he had to say about InVision, I set up a call with the head of customer success at the time. And I remember thinking like, wow, I've got a job interview at 9 p.m. at night. This is already really bizarre. And again, because when you think about interviewing for a job in person, it comes into what do you wear? How dressed up should you be? Particularly, working in tech, is a suit too much? Is it not enough? So having that first call with him, and he was really, really great. And from that point, he said, look, I would like you to go through the process. And when I asked about the process, he sent me an email with a summary, and it was just a whole bunch of Zoom links. And that was sort of the first moment it clicked. Like, I'm not going to speak to a human being in person for this entire experience. With the Zoom links, I got sent through LinkedIn profiles of all the InVision folk who I would be speaking with. And as part of that process, I had a role play exercise. It's very, very common for most, client-facing positions you go for in tech. The folks who were going to be on that call were in Northern England, in a town that I can't even remember. I'd never heard of it. Very, very small town. The Netherlands, Israel, and one more in Germany. And that was the panel.
Very interesting. Okay, and did you ever have multiple interviews in one day, one after the other? What did that look like?
They were always spread out. I guess it's quite difficult to continue to book these interviews with the Australian time zone compared to the rest of the world because we live in the future. But it was never back to back or anything like that. I always had a good amount of time in between to prepare, but I dare say that if it was a lot more feasible, if it was a lot more easier to be able to schedule these, and I probably would have gone through that process of having multiple in one day.
So what would you say are some of the main challenges with interviewing fully remote?
I guess the first one, and this will impact everyone a little bit differently, but for myself, I love face-to-face interaction. It's why I got into these client-facing roles, and it's one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to get into customer success, because whilst InVision works remotely, I still have the amazing benefit of going to meet my customers in person and travel to these customers and work with their design teams in person. So for me personally, the biggest challenge was, how do I read the room? How do I read the other person when they're just a small part of my screen? What experience is that going to be like? So for me personally, I'm very much someone who likes to study and learn about body language and how people conduct themselves in meetings. So not being able to do that was hands down a big challenge. I guess one that you could say was unique to me again was just the timings, having to do interviews at 11 p.m. at night be on, be awake. And the third one, I guess, was just expectations. I didn't know if remote interviewing was different to in person. I didn't know if, because I'm working remote, does that mean there's more steps in the process? Is there less?
Well, and now that you have gone through not only interviewing, but also working remote as you have, how could someone prepare best for going in an interview now if they're going to be interviewing fully remote?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first piece of advice that I would give is you treat a remote interview as if you're sitting in front of that individual in person. Because now that I look back and now that I've spent a year living on Zoom calls, how you conduct yourself on a Zoom call is literally no different to how you conduct yourself in an interview. So whether it's how you dress for that particular interview, every single person knows individually how they best dress and, present themselves for those kinds of opportunities. And the cliche of you dress for the job that you want, not the one you have. You treat that approach to a remote interview exactly how you would an in-person interview. The second piece I would say is the environment that you're setting yourself up in for that remote interviews. And if you can really set yourself up in a way that showcases who you are a little bit as a person, I've seen some incredible home office environments at InVision. People have spent a lot of time very carefully curating how they want to be presented on the camera. And for me personally, I've got a normally large canvas of New York that I had to put together, which was another challenge. But New York is my favorite place in the world. It's where I lived for a year and where I really developed as a corporate professional. And, I love having this in my background because it's a conversation starter. It tells the person on the camera a little bit about who I am, particularly if I'm talking to folks in the US, because they always ask why it's up there.
I just wanted to say I love that because I always talk about how important story is. And when you're putting together a presentation for any type of interview, a really important thing to make sure you think about and you build into your presentation is like, who are you? Like, how are you going to share about yourself? And on a video call, you have this great, unique opportunity to like fill the space behind you or place somewhere that's really personal and that could help tell that story.
Absolutely.
I love that. And also, that was the first thing I asked you. I was like,
exactly.
So it worked.
Exactly right. I think the last major point that I would say is when you're on a video call, make sure you're really engaged in the camera and your call. Our laptops are a source of so many distractions. And, I can have on a given work day when I'm on a Zoom call with a client or an internal call, I'll have Slack popping up, messages or emails. And it's very, very easy to tell when folks on a video call aren't paying attention. Their eyes will wander, they'll look at something else, they'll look down at their phone. It happens all the time. And it's very, very easy to tell. Right now, even as I speak to you, Zoom is the only thing that's on my screen. I've got my do not disturb off on my camera, exact same on my phone. When you're going into a face-to-face interview or a presentation, whatever it may be, you wouldn't go in there with a notebook full of notes to read off, right? You got to come in just as prepared for a virtual call as you would for an in-person. I've been fortunate in my year here to also be part of hiring processes for our team down here in APAC. And it's the first thing you notice when you're on the other chair in this experience. It's very, very quick to notice when people aren't prepared.
That's great. Wow. I'm really glad you brought that up because even before this call, this is my personal computer. I have iMessage set up, so I get text messages directly to my computer. And I was like, I gotta make sure to disable that because it could pop up during our call and that could not only be distracting, but I'm recording this and that, I want my message to pop up. If I was sharing my screen for whatever reason, that could share personal information, that wouldn't be good. In Slack, I could see that as also being super distracting. And I guess not everyone knows what Slack is, but it's like an internal messaging tool a lot of companies use to communicate within their teams. Very cool. I'm sort of curious, is there any like super memorable interview that you've been a part of that stands out that you could share a story about?
Most super memorable I can think of off the top of my head was we were interviewing for a sales gentleman here in Sydney, and I can't quite remember where he was, but he wasn't in Sydney at the time. He was traveling with family and so on. And he had a giant Labrador. He had set himself up in his hotel and we were having a chat. And, basically this dog just came, basically crash tackled him from the side because his wife had let the dog in and dog had gone crazy running and completely blindsided him. It was pretty funny.
So the lesson is, if you don't have a dog, adopt one. And then after the interview, make sure that they're let in.
Exactly right.
Well, thank you so much. This was seriously super excellent. It's going to be so helpful for so many people. If anyone wanted to check you out online, is there a place where you'd want to send them?
My Instagram page, that's the best way to get me most likely.
That's it for now. Chris, thank you. We'll say bye now, but don't leave. Don't turn
Okay, yes.
Okay, thank you so much. It was so great talking to you. Until next time.
No, thank you so much. Stay safe.